能听到我说话吗？大家好，欢迎欢迎，我们能听到您，太好了，非常感谢。嗯、早上一切都顺利吧？非常棒。我们也期待能够听到您的一些背景和您的经验，太好了，我很高兴来跟大家分享我自己的一些经历。我们就现在就开始吗？好的，我觉得我们这一节的主题呢，就是推动合作，尤其是公私合营方面的合作。尤其呢是您也有很多的经验，是佛罗里达州的前第一夫人。那么您是如何来促成公私合营、推动项目实施的呢？您可以先介绍一下您自己，然后再回应一下我刚才的问题。好的，大家早上好，很高兴参加今天的这次研讨。这次对话是关于 SDG 目标的实现的，也希望我们能够整合各方面的资源来应对全球的需求，因为它确实呢影响了全球的人们的生活。那么我在纽约，我当时呢也去了乔治城，也去了很多的学校来进行沟通交流。那么在 DC 的那个大学也进行了对话。我们知道当时我们呢有一个100多年的一个家族企业，在纽约有很大的这个国际贸易额，涉及了不同的文化，全球的供应链，包括制造业，还有零售、线上电商业务等等。然后呢，我也又去了这个一个私营的一个喷气机的一个公司来嗯进行一些工作。之后呢，成为了佛罗里达州的第一夫人。那么当时呢，就碰到了这个全球的经济萧条，这是在2008年的时候，当时是一个备受挑战的时刻，我们也越来越清楚地认识到，政府应该干预来提振经济。所以呢，我们当时也是在这个资本市场、信贷市场推出了一系列的项目，那么重振了经济，这是非常令人兴奋的。通过这个经历呢，我们也更深入地了解到，有这种公共部门的参与和合作是多么重要的。不光是在联邦政府，在州政府层面，这种合作是非常重要的。那么，我们也看到，有的时候是自上而下的合作模式，但是很多情况下呢，是可以是自下而上的，也就是你可以从一个地方的政府，一个城市的具体问题开始打造合作网络，然后呢，再共同发声，来应对一些普适性的问题，引起上一级部门的注意，来采取相应的行动。那么我们呢也有一些市长聚到一起，来向联邦政府来呼吁当地的某些问题是急需解决的，我们面临共同的挑战的，所以这是自下而上的模式。同时呢，
慈善呢一直是我的一项工作重点，包括慈善，呃，募款，采取行动，那包括红十字会呢，还有其他一些慈善机构，我都给他们提供了资金的支持，跟他们合作，相关的业务呢也是遍布全球，我们也会开展相关的一些慈善研究工作。也包括在气候领域的项目。那么，包括我周围的社交圈子，我的朋友，对这方面的工作也非常的关注。此外呢，我们的家族事务管理办公室呢，也最近几年也是在开展相关的活动，能够把家族的财富充分的利用起来，支持相关的工作。我们跟一群有良知的人一起来合作，包括洛杉矶的研究所，达沃斯的世界经济论坛，还有纽约以及欧洲的这些机构，我们都在相互的合作。我们在这个网络之中呢，是经常的去进行跟慈善相关的对话。那么在这个网络里面，呃，各个富裕家庭都非常非常的关注慈善的工作。
capital, investment capital,
我们希望能够引导资本和资金来支持
or financially beneficial endeavors and projects
相关的一些项目，不仅是能够获得财务上的回报，而且可以造福于大众，产生积极的社会效益。在我看来，在当前的这个时代背景之下，显得尤为重要。当然，这样的工作呢，也需要具备相关的规模。现在我们谈的是 SDG，SDG 是各个国家都必须要去做的一项事宜。我们年轻的一代在成长，他们也有更强烈的 SDG 的意识。所以呢，对于我们这种家族企业来说呢，我们不仅是要实现家庭财富的保值和增值，而且有了新的追求。年轻一代呢，他们也有新的诉求。我有两个女儿，都已经长大了，他们有自己的工作重心，我们也希望让他们参与到家族财富管理和慈善工作中来，
are
希
elevating that
望培养他们的兴趣和社会责任，也希望他们能够参与自下而上的对话，通过父母的言传身教，呃，来引导他们。这个样呢，也会成为家族中的一项很宝贵的资产。需要通过对话让他们继续跟社会保持接触。那么这个过程中呢，大家都是增长的见识，也都有很多的收获。
No, that's
好，
an
我就讲这么多吧。
opening, if I may.
好，我觉得这个开场白确实是非常有意义，提到了很多点啊，
Of
包括你说要自下而上的来开展工作，还有个人的体验非常的重要，要为国家服务，为社会服务，还有呢，现在是转向分享的这种转变，还有关于 SDG 的使命等等，
forward.
以及也是说到你们家族传承的未来发展。
This shift is actually now going to be an overarching theme, if I will, of the next couple of
可以这
hours.
么说，我们接下来2个小时呢，也都会重点去谈如何去进行转型，这个跟您讲的内容呢，也是一脉相承的。
I know you want to stay on and learn
我
and
知道你其实是很想继续参加我们后续的讨论的，所以呢，如果方便的话，就麻烦您一直参加，如果有什么问题可以提出来。好的，好的，我也期待着向大家学习，谢谢，感谢你刚才的点评。
Thank you so much for that. Well, it is exactly that kind of theme. And
好
with
的，
that, I would love to turn
有
over
了这么一
to
个基
Mr.
调之后呢，
Matador,
我就想
who's
请
the
呃
for New Development Bank calling in from China.
新开发银行的 CFO
It's very
Leslie
right that
Mastop 来介绍一下他们的转型工作。
but we're actually
啊，
seeing it
刚
from
才我们谈到了从商业转向慈善，
and this is something
转
that
向
it would be great
开发和发
to
展，
share
而
your
这也是
experience
新
on
开发
that,
银行
as
的
well as the
使命
power
所在。
dynamics that we're seeing of who controls capital,
那
how is capital
背
allocated,
后的这种权力分配也在发生变化，
how
谁控制
development
资
banks are
本， 谁
doing,
来
and
分
what
配
the
资
mandate
本，
of New Development Bank,
新开发银行在这方面要发挥什么样的作用？
versus some of the subnational investments.
而
At the
且
end of
你
the
们
day,
在
channel
国
is
家和地
really
方投资上
investing
会
in
有什么样的
urban,
侧重？
sustainable urban
尤其是
finance
今
and
天我们的主
into
题呢，还是如
investing
何
in
为城
subnational
市可持续发展
investments.
提
And so
供资
just
金，
to
也想听一
share a
下
bit
新
more
开发
perspective
银行
as to
NDB 的
what
这
some
方
of
面的一
the
些
things that
想
have
法
been
和举
invested
措。
in over the last couple of years
好，
since you formed, and some of the
呃，
shifts in
在
the
新开发银行成立之后几年中， 做了很多
Thank you
了
very
不
much,
起
Alice,
的
for
项目啊，请你给我们
inviting
介绍一
me.
下。
And
好，谢谢
please welcome
Alice，
my guest
请
yesterday
我
from the
来
President
参
of the
加
New
会议。
Development Bank,
昨
Mr.
天呢，我
Matador,
们行长也
also
做了一个开幕
gave
致
the
辞。
keynote address. So it's a great privilege to tell a little
我
bit of
自
the
己
story
呢
about the
也
New
非
Development
常
Bank, but
荣
more
幸，
specifically
再
to
深入的
advise
具体的
our
介绍
clients
一
on
下
what are some of the
新
changes
开
taking
发银行的
place
情况，
in the
尤
way
其
that
是介绍一下
multilateral
我们
development
正在
banks
进行的
are
一
used
些
to reconfigure
改变，
their
我们
business
也在
models
反
to
思
be fit
现有
for
的业
purpose
务模
for the
式
local
要如何
markets
去进
and
行
for the
调整，
greater world
来
of
实现
moving towards.
人类共同的繁荣。
2-minute snapshot of what the New Development Bank is. This is the
我花
creation
2
of
分
the
钟
first
简单介绍一
bank
下
in Brazil, Russia,
新
and
开
South
发银行，
Africa
这
to
是
be
金砖
put
国家
together
共同
and
发起成立的一个金融机
operated
构。
in 2009 or so. And in
应该
2015,
是09年的
he
时
was
候，
summoning in
就
Brazil
开始有了
to
想
Lima
法。
to
到
form
了
a new
2014
emerging
年的
market
时候，
focused
终于决
local
定
bank
要
that
成立
is
一个专门
here in
针
China.
对新兴市
Also,
场
we
的
stepped back because the bank has to
这
be
么一个
seen
投资机
against
构，总部
the
设在中国。
context of the rise of emerging markets. And emerging markets
我们之所以能够成立，背后的大背景呢，是新兴的市场在不断的增长。
there's been a tension in the development
99 年的时候 G20 会议呢，就提到新兴市场在不断的增长，但是呢，经济实力上去了，在国际舞台上的影响力呢却非常的有限，无法发出自己的声音。 大家当时都在说，印度、巴西、中国，都在不断的增长，经济实力越来越强。但是在 IMF 啊、世行啊，还有其他的一些国际金融机构里面，大家的代表权呢还是比较有限的。这是我们成立新开发银行的基本背景。 我们现在成立呢，是希望能够对其他的发展金融机构提供补充，而不是与他们相互竞争。我们是希望能够跟世行、IMF， 还有比如说泛美银行来相互合作。所以呢，每家银行出资100亿，每个国家出资100亿。
spread over 79 projects in the 5
我们现在呢，已经在79个项目里面投了310亿美元了，分布在5个金砖国家。我们是如何去调动资本来进行新主题投资的？在过去6到7年间，我们都在深刻的反思，就是传统的多边发展银行的业务模式，是不是要进行调整？
4 or 5 areas, I would say.
我觉得呢，至少在5个领域，我们需要做出改变。第一点最重要，
2015 when the UN
在2015年的时候，联合国在亚的士88提出了亚的士188议程，
is so
就
limited
是说到
needs.
面
I mean,
对庞大的发展的需求，公共资源或者政府资源是非常的有限，所以我们必须要去调动多元化的资源来支持发展，但是在之后6、7年间呢，有一些工作在做，总体的规模呢并没有得到一个快速的扩张，
private sector capital happened in a very sort of
所以呢，
manner. So the first major challenge that
当时所筹集的一些资金呢去做投资的话，还是比较分散的，缺乏规模效应。
was formed in the aftermath of the Second World War, 1944.
世行是成立在2战之后，当时
the model that emerged
我们
remains
面临巨大的市场失灵，
decades, and most of the banks have
大
a
多数的银行
book that is essentially 70% or 80% in some cases sovereign backed, and then some of them have started
需要得到政府的救济，他们的资本有70%到80%是来自政府。那世行呢，同样还有跟它相关的国际金融公司啊等等来开展发展相关的工作。所以当时的一些机构呢，都是有公共资金和私人资金的参与。
in order to create an enabling environment for large
但
institutions
是
to commit
对于大型的机构投资者来说，这样的一种工作模式呢，会有风险。
currently being deployed in this regard. And I'll just say one or two things about them.
我跟大家介绍一下我们在这方面的一些战略。
Mobilizing more private sector capital.
大家都在说要去动员私人部门的资金，
De-risking machines for us to use our very high credit rating, our credit worthiness.
那首先，私人资本的话，肯定要去关注信用评级最高的项目，这样的话，我们的投资组合才有足够的保障。每一家投资机构、每家银行机构都要对自己的股东负责，所以呢，他在投资的时候必须要考虑到投资目标的信用评级，从而来保证自己的投资组合的信用质量和评级。这是过去一直的传统的做法。第二点就是要引进更多的资金来进行组合投资，而不是专门针对某一个项目进行投资。那比如说像黑石啊，或者其他的一些机构投资者，他们都是采用的组合投资的方式，而不是专门针对某一个特定的项目来做投资。
Managed co-lending portfolio program is the formal name, but it's essentially a
比如
series
说
of
有 MCPG 这样的一种核心的管理投资组合。那
institutional
么机构投资者在做投资的时候，就把资金放到这样的平台或者是组合中来进行投资，而不会自己去找项目来
change, a shift from a predominantly public sector towards more private sector. The second area linked to that is for us to play more of a catalytic role. At the moment, for example, many MDBs finance projects as a whole, meaning that they take the risk. They originate the project, hold the loan to maturity, and they pretty much fund most of the project, or they co-finance with another institution. The aim in future is to be much more of a catalyst, to be a mobilizer, and to not, commit the full financing for a project. The third area that I think is very critical is that for MDBs to do more co-financing, each of these institutions have acted as very much as individual sort of enterprises. And there's a clear recognition that we need to leverage more of the system. The sum of the parts is so much bigger than the individual sort of enterprises. And to do that effectively, we need to find ways to standardize and harmonize our policies, harmonize our pricing policies, harmonize our ESG standards, harmonize our policies on transparency, on corruption, procurement, all of these. There's different nuances and variations in all of the MDBs, which makes it difficult to structure effective co-financing and to bring the private sector in. So there's a huge effort now to bring together and to be more to leverage more of the system and to bring together the complementarities of the various institutions. The next area, which is a very exciting, one of the most exciting areas, I think, is to go back to the fundamentals of the financial and capital structure of multilateral banks, because there's a view from many people today that the institutions are too risk averse. So the G20 2 months ago under the Italian presidency decided on a new review, or a new sort of investigation or commission, if you like, and it's called the Capital Adequacy Review. And this is a very important effort that will be done by next year when the G20 moves to Indonesia. And they will decide effectively, are we not too conservative in the way that we deploy our capital? Isn't there spare lending headroom, in other words? Because during this crisis, just to give you an example, a few studies have been done by the Center for Global Development in Washington, DC, as well as ODI in London, where they investigated, contrasted and compared the 2008-2009 crisis with the 2020 COVID crisis. And it is rather odd and strange that although this crisis is so much deeper, the impact on poor and developing countries, low-income countries is so much harder, the impact on households and communities, small and medium-sized businesses and so on. And yet the scale in terms of the increase of lending was bigger in 2009. So the increase, for example, by the World Bank and the top 8 multilateral banks was about 38% during the global financial crisis, or rather 76%, and there's only 38% in 2020. So there is a suggestion that there is potential spare capacity on the balance sheet of these institutions. And this idea is not something that is just emanated in 2020. In 2015, as you might know, the G20, when they met in Antalya, also came up with what they call balance sheet optimization. And they came up with 5 different strategies. They directed MDBs to look at ways to optimize the balance sheet more. And this idea of looking at capital efficiency was already raised then, but it's now, there's a much more focused conversation to see if we cannot leverage more. And just to give you a quick example without going into the technical details, most banks, commercial banks, etc., financial institutions have a leverage ratio set by the Basel Committee in Switzerland, the banking regulator, of around 10, 11 or 12. Multilateral banks have leverage ratios of 3 with a maximum ratio of 4. In practice, many of them operate at a ratio of 2.5 or in that order of magnitude, meaning that there are buffers, there are cushions, there's spare capacity, and we might be too risk averse in the way that we conduct our activities. And then the final 2 points I'd like to make with is that what COVID-19 has done is really shine a very sharp sort of spotlight on the bigger role that our institutions have to play during moments of crises, because we have a unique counter-cyclical mandate. As you know, when the World Bank was formed way back 75 years ago, there was a deep crisis. We were designed for moments of crises. And therefore, we have to look at can we play a bigger role to correct and balance the very sort of pro-cyclical way in which markets function. So other ideas about how the multilateral system as a whole can be reinvigorated towards the sort of climate agenda also needs to be looked at. And then the final point I'd like to make with respect to the MDBs is that MDBs can play a leadership role in sustainable banking. As you know, the multilateral banks, the European Investment Bank, the World Bank were the first to issue green bonds in 2007. That market did not exist before 2007. Today, it's a market that is $1.4 trillion strong. And the important point here is that we have, because of our high credit worthiness, we can do innovative and pioneering things that the traditional commercial institutions cannot do. So especially now as we enter the era of sort of net zero, where we need to redefine and relook at our toolbox, look at more ESG compliant financial products, look at our guarantees and all of the instruments that we use, and trying to green these instruments, if you like. MDBs now have to look at how do we green our business models in every respect. And in that sense, move away from some of the traditional work which we have been doing. And to put it simply, some are arguing that we should be focusing only on global public goods, things like pandemics, climate change, the sort of challenges that are transnational in character, because you can only solve them you cannot only solve them in one nation state, you have to solve them everywhere. And then lastly, and I think this is an interesting debate underway at the moment, which is about who will be the custodians of the stranded assets. There are large numbers of coal-fired power stations that will now become stranded, coal mines, and a lot of fossil fuel related assets. There's a discussion, and Kenneth Rogoff from Harvard University have argued in a couple of opinion pieces, and many others support his idea that we need to create a world carbon bank, that we need dedicated new institutions to specifically manage the new challenges that will come with the transition period. Now, it's a very sort of ambitious idea, because others argue that we do not have the scope now to create new institutions and go through the motions of that. But there is some point has to be made about who will be the best public stewards of, the stranded assets that we will now have. Stranded communities will result from that, and potential social instability and new forms of inequality linked to the green climate agenda. And I'm from South Africa, for example. We have one province called Mpumalanga, where we have about 20 odd of our power stations located. If, for example, all of those power stations are decommissioned at some stage over the next 10, 15, 20 years, you will have large stranded communities and so on. So the management of these, of that will become a critical issue as well. I'll pause there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leslie. My goodness, so rich, and really this shift, as you're talking about, of the role of different actors in the ecosystem. It's interesting, we're seeing it with the development banks, where it's much more catalytic capital as opposed to direct lending, and so much other evolution, this aligned policies to allow for collaboration and so forth. I'd love if, and Benicio, I'm going to ask you if you could just spend 1 minute, since we're running just a little bit late. What's the reaction? And Benicio here is from a commercial bank. And so are commercial banks also undergoing some of these shifts, especially given the vision that Leslie, for example, has outlined, working with multilateral development banks and other DFIs? How is this evolving? And so we'd love to get a little bit of reaction from you, and then we'll be moving into the next part of the discussion. Thanks.
So thank you, Alice. And first of all, good morning, good afternoon. And thank you, UN Habitat and SDG Cities, for this opportunity to participating in this fantastic discussion. So let me give you my reaction to what Leslie pointed out. I'm actually working in the largest subnational development bank in Brazil, and I have spent more than 15 years in multilateral development banks across the globe, most of the time in leading multilateral banks, both for sovereign and non-sovereign, in Washington, D.C. And I think, like Leslie mentioned, there is a large shift towards the role and the ability of multilateral banks to make an impact, and maybe through capital adequacy discussion, transform or leverage a little bit more the ability of capital to convert into real impact. As a subnational bank, we are close to the action, and we are very close to where the action happened. And so for us, we have the capillarity to understand the field and to understand the challenges that takes to bring large ticket amounts from a multilateral bank and convert them into real small projects that make a difference in the lives of people from smaller or small and medium-sized cities. So my reaction here is that like the transformation that we are going through requires a ton of collaboration and understanding the role of each element, each chain, like each link in the development chain of development financing. So while multilateral banks can leverage a ton of capital and multiply that with the highly, credit or the highly rated credit rating that they have, it is also important to have subnational partners that know the field, that can understand and then use creative and different forms of financing to reach the final, or to reach that population that either unbankable or underbanked. So I think it is a complement. So we need to establish. The good thing now is that we can speak the same language, and the 2030 agenda helps us to speak the same language. So my final reaction and my final thought is that we need to put all the ducks in a row and understand how we can identify and join forces across all the spectrum of financial institutions to make the impact in a timely manner. So for instance, I'm the chief risk officer and the chief strategy officer for the bank. Our strategy is based on SDGs, and without that alignment, we cannot get price competitive funds, and then we cannot put together projects that are good enough to attract also private sector funding. So my final point in here is that we need this coordination. We need the multilateral banks and the private sector deep pockets, but also the understanding of the field to have a timely reaction to bring cities and then projects to fruition in enough, with enough time for making to get to some of the development goals that we have. And finally, I think that what is extremely important to mention here today, in the context of talking about SDGs and cities, and then we can talk a little bit more in the panel, is that funding cities and small towns and medium-sized cities is a very profitable business. And what it takes is this coordination with risk mitigants, new product developments, and a lot of the use of technology, data, and other elements that were not there before to make it happen. But it is profitable, and it's not only profitable, it has the potential of making a huge impact in people's lives. So I guess is like Leslie said, it is an interesting time. It is this post-pandemic that we are facing is the opportunity to coordinate efforts and plan the reconstruction in a greener way or in a more sustainable way, and financing cities is in the heart of that challenge and that opportunity. So that's a little bit of my reaction to Leslie, which is my former colleague in Shanghai a few years ago. So greetings as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. And goodness, having worked in a commercial bank for so many years, saying that this is profitable seems rather transformative. But as you're saying, the actors do need to work together. And it's starting to sound pretty complex and systemic for everyone to come together. And so I'd love to launch into our panel discussion and turn, firstly, we have several speakers, and Benicio, we will come back to you again. And we have several speakers on this panel. And what I love about the structure here is that we're going to hear from different stakeholders in the ecosystem. But first, to set the stage, I'd love to turn to Leanne, who's been really thinking about these systemic issues as the CEO of Blend Lab. And how do we really think about de-risking what's happening in the system overall? So maybe I'll turn it over to Leanne first, and then we'll go around and we'll hear from cities, we'll hear from other investors, and we'll hear from other intermediaries that are trying to move the system forward. So Leanne, over to you first. Give us a little bit of a picture, and if I can ask you to take no more than maybe about 3 minutes to give your overview to our audience.
Thank you very much, Alice. It's a real pleasure to be here with Leslie and Vinicius from MDB Bank, and I loved their presentations as well. That is a real good introduction for what I have to say. So what we can see here at this point of the conference is that we really already have a very huge and powerful ecosystem of financing. So that is really needed because we are dealing with this main challenge of driven and unlocking private capital to finance SDGs on time. That's another variable that I would like to add. So we have to be very precise in terms of which would be the main mainstream and vehicles and everything that must have to be ready to make the capital flow. So when we are talking about unlocking, we are talking about more complex dimensions. So we are talking about private and public funding. We are talking about the different and diverse assets from private sector. So, and we know that each one has its own features and way of doing de-risking mainly, basically. So bringing that, I would like to point out at least 5 or 4 key elements of de-risking that is a very critical thing that to think about. So to have an ecosystem where you can really join all resources, you have to consider, as Vinicius brought, the project side, so the field side. We will have opportunity here to discuss more the project preparation, but mainly the portfolio of projects, as Leslie brought. So we can do a very high level of de-risking, exactly bringing together a joint effort in a joint projects that really can bring SDG development in a different way. Now, another dimension of de-risking that I would like to add is the funding dimension. So in this one, it's very clear that we'll need a hybrid financing architecture. So what is exactly a hybrid financing architecture? We are talking about blended finance vehicles. We are talking about exactly how to put different vehicles together. So we are talking about intern and inter de-risking with vehicles. So we have to consider that as well. And the third that I would like to turn is exactly the finance assets. So it's the roles and mainly the timing of each partner. So in here, I would like to highlight the roles of DFIs. So we are talking here about the chain of DFIs, not just to mobilize, but to leverage the private capital flow. So, and this is very important. And bringing here what we can call the catalytic effort. So the catalytic effort is exactly to prepare all of this on time. So we are talking basically about the DFI's roles that was so important. They explained this so well. And would like to add the Carol's perspective, bringing the philanthropic role, because the philanthropic funds plays really an important role to promote and guarantee the impact at the end. And all of this technical assistance, all of this preparation, we can use better the philanthropic funds, and mainly for the warranties. Warranties is something that I would like to add as well. Warranties, we will need very innovative solutions on that, because mainly to support and finance the small cities and to make the impact at the end. So it's not just to be innovative, but to have the main mechanisms or the proper mechanisms to do so. And at the end, we know that we will need regulations, but until then, we already have sandboxes. That is a very protected environment where you can be innovative and bring solutions on time. So you can really provide, since now, you can provide a very important solution, financing solutions to deliver SDGs investments. And besides that, we talked about coordination, coordinating efforts. We talked about new institutions. I like this idea as well, but we have to consider many different ways of doing that. So platform is really needed in terms of governing and promoting these exchanges and these combinations of resources. So, and we need to have a very specific standards. So that's some points that I will bring for the discussion.
That's a fantastic overview, Leon. Thank you so much. So you can see how rich, on the one hand, it's exciting to see this paradigm shift, these new mandates, again, starting with Carol's use of that word. And then now, how do you actually make that happen? It's a much more complex world. It's a much more collaborative and aligned world. And so what I'd like to take a moment then is to go through the roles of different ecosystem actors in this vision. The first one is very much aligned to mobilizing capital. We've talked about some of the philanthropic side of the world, some of the high net worth individuals. We've talked about the development banks and DFIs. We've talked about the commercial banks. I'd like to push a little bit more on the foundations and the large pockets of capital that are out there. So first, I'd like to turn to Nana, if I may. She's calling in from Faith Invest, and sometimes we don't realize how large kind of a size of capital the faith sectors are. So if I can ask Nana Francois, if you can come in and share with us your thoughts about the role that faith-based actors can play in mobilizing capital and bringing them to this systemic new vision. And I'll also add that Nana's actually spent a lot of time in the private sector and private equity and banks and so forth. So she's really straddling this world of philanthropy and finance. So maybe over to you.
Thanks very much, Alison. Thank you, everyone. And yes, absolutely. I represent Faith Invest. We work with faith groups to help them mobilize capital to invest in a faith-consistent way for the good of people and planet. And when we talk about faith groups, we're talking about the institutions, not just your traditional Abrahamic kind of Christian, Islamic, Jewish, but also the Sikhs, the Buddhists, the Taoists, the Shinto, genuinely global. And when you look at all of the assets that they have together, both what they invest in and what they control, you were looking at very significant amounts. If you look at purely financial assets, you've got a couple of trillion in Islamic finance, and there's limited disclosure in various other places, but you've got 100 billion in the Mormons, who knows what is the Catholic Church, lots of direct financial investment. Then you add all the schools and the hospitals, and you start to see the huge influence, both of faith institutions and all the way down to the ground, to the laity. And I think we've all been talking about the connection between what you do on the multilateral level and how it gets down on the ground to make cities work better. So when we kind of come to this concept of looking at cities and how can faiths help to mobilize capital to do good along the lines of what the SDGs are suggesting, I think there are kind of three ways in which the faiths act in interaction with everybody. One is actually just looking at what they're doing within their own states. A lot of faiths are kind of remanaging the way they look at their own real estate, their own buildings, and really saying, how can we make these community centers, not just places of worship? How can we make ourselves more effective? Can we green? Can we create entrepreneurship around that? That's one element that isn't mobilizing new capital, but maybe looking at what they're doing internally. What is mobilizing new capital is, and I'll separate between the global north and the global south, because they're kind of taking different approaches. In the global north, you're having a lot more focus on what people would call place-based impact investing, which is very much debt-focused, debt-first, looking around you, quite often, again, into real estate and buildings in that sense, but also into specific entrepreneurs. And it's very much around what technology should we invest in, what education should we invest in, what housing should we invest in, to make sure that where we are being impactful, not just from global north to global south, but also north to north, where there's also need to regenerate and to make a difference. So it's very much debt first, local. That's what the global north is doing broadly. Global South are kind of saying, well, there are major gaps in terms of the institutional finance. Yes, you have the development banks, yes, you have commercial banks, but they're huge populations, often migrant populations who are there, who are not being supported. So rather than kind of investing in what exists, a few of them have started their own savings and loans companies, started their own banks. That's how they're helping their cities. They're using the money that they're putting in those institutions to fund the local people to regenerate or to generate the cities. And that's kind of, if you like, a self-to-self solution. Where I think it gets interesting is in the third area, which is much harder to do, but we have a couple of examples within Faith Invest of faith groups who have we'll take one example, Kano City, very strong in terms of the Sufi Islamic movement. They've taken that city on. It was a big focus for pilgrimage, taken it on, trying to work with Responsibility and African Development Bank to say we don't just need a few 100,000, we actually need many millions. This is the scale of what we want to do. Can we create something where, yes, the faith contributes, but others also contribute to something that's a sustainable change? And what is quite good in that conversation is that traditionally faiths has always been seen as the concessionary capital providers, which has not been favorable to them. They run pensions too, they have obligations to make. But I think the conversation is maturing both as they are recognizing the many ways in which they can bridge from philanthropy to investment and maybe take different bits of their operation to fiddle in different bits of the capital channel, capital bridge to really be impactful. So I've said quite a lot there, Alice, I will pause, but that's a little bit of a sense of, from our perspective, from Global North, Global South, how faiths are looking at the challenges of cities.
Maybe just one very quick follow-up question, which is what should be done to mobilize more of this capital? Because it seems like it's still sitting there on the sidelines, and you're seeing these shifts with the development banks and the commercial banks. Of course, more can be needed, but it does feel like they're still on the sidelines.
I would say that the biggest gap is really the education gap. A lot of our faith groups simply don't know what vehicles they can and should use in order to mobilize their capital to be impactful in cities. There's so many different levels, from the infrastructure to specific investments, that it's been too blank. And so they've done what they can do, what they can see. But if that education gap could be filled, plus different opportunities along the capital spectrum, I think that would be really positive and helpful.
Fantastic. So some work to do on our side and packaging up some of the investment opportunities that can unlock more of this capital, whether it's catalytic from the high net worth individuals or maybe the larger several $1 trillion, as you say, that could invest a lot more. So thank you so much for those comments. What I'd love to do is to continue to build out the different pieces of the ecosystem and turn to Lori Rufo. I mean, you're calling in from, excuse me, you're really calling in from the Climate Investment Fund and thinking about, yes, that sectoral lens, but playing in again from how are the different actors shifting of what they need to do. And I'd love to take it from the capital mobilization side down to the needs side. What are we really doing with the cities? And so if you could maybe share a little bit of the evolution of your thinking from projects to programs, and how, Lori, you're really working with the cities themselves to take them through this transition to access capital in this new paradigm as we've been discussing. So Lori, over to you to share your approach to this question. Lori, can you hear me? Oh, there you are. You're on mute, or we can't hear you. No, the mic's not working. It's not working. I can give you 10 more seconds and then we can come back to you. You want to try one more time? Lori, are you there? Okay, we'll give you a minute. What we'll do is maybe while Lori is in process of fixing her mic, we're going to stay on this cities question. And I would love to turn to Mr. Mozaffari, who's calling in from Tehran. And he's really done an incredible amount of work in mobilizing capital for some of the Tehran investments. He's also representing a lot of the Asian mayors, the Asian Mayors Forum as the Secretary General. And so would love to hear your perspective, given these capital shifts that you're hearing about if you can briefly, and I'm sorry, we are short of time, just take 2 or 3 minutes to share your experiences and how you're seeing cities can engage more with all of these financial actors that are out there that are eager to provide more of this kind of investment. So over to you, Mr. Mozaffari.
So thank you very much, and hello everyone. Good afternoon from Tehran, the General Secretariat of Asian Mayors Forum. And thank you for inviting me. I am very happy to joining you in this nice meeting. As you said, Asian Mayor Forum is a kind of technical network to push cooperation between Asian mayors and city leaders. It established in 2008 in Tehran by a big support of Asian mayors and city managers. And we have active in different areas of the international cooperation among cities, including smart city and public transportation and traffic, and also to help the cities to be more resilient in front of
Can you guys hear him?
I think he's on mute. Yeah, that's good.
Oh, there you go.
Sorry. As you know, the concerns of the mayors and city leaders is very, very important to mobilize our financial resources. The mayors are active as in fact, the practitioners at the front line of the preparing the citizens' daily needs, and they should be responsive, accountable, and also transparent against the cities. As I said, this is very important to know about the concerns of the city managers. What is the basic needs to the citizens? For example, having the clean air, food security, health facilities, education, house and shelter, accessible and fairly cost, cheap transportation systems and mobility for the citizens also is very important. We should mobilize our, in fact, resources and investments to preparing the basic and daily needs of the citizens. How we as the city leaders should spend the limited budget and the money of inside the cities due to expanding the infrastructure and public services. So what is the main priorities? This is very important to refer to the public opinion and also to city practitioners' opinion to forming the urban investment and in allocating the limited resources. Also, the equity and inclusiveness, in my opinion, is very important. And they should, I think, they should locate it at the center part of the city development and city governance policies and strategies. I mean, inclusiveness and equity inside the cities, and to cover all the groups and vulnerable groups and all young people and elderly people, and also the kids and women, all of them. So to do this, I think the participatory and performance-based budgeting is very important to the city officials and local governments. Having the opinion of the key stakeholders also. For example, what is the opinion of the vulnerable groups about the city development policies and strategies? And having their participation and making a very good relationship with the key stakeholder inside the city also is very important. In Tehran, as we are located in Tehran, there is an imbalance between the revenues and expenses of Tehran Metropolitan Municipality. And this is a very critical and fundamental issues to our metropolitan government. Despite a more than 5.5 increasing in Tehran municipality's budget over the past 10 years. But unfortunately, the preparing the resources, financial resources, and mobilizing the investment from internal side and outside of the country is remain very critical. Inadequacy of financial resources to manage the development and maintenance of Tehran has always been one of the concerns of senior city managers. And during current situation caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, unfortunately, they has imposed critical conditions to the city management in this regard. According to the real field evidence during the 2 last years, I mean 2019 and 2020, only 70% of Tehran municipality budget has realized. And accordingly, and under the impacts of the pandemic on the city revenue, the use of new and innovative methods of financing and investment as a necessity should be on the agenda of the metropolitan leaders and officials. As a result of research projects to review and analyze of the recent 10 years budget of Tehran municipality, shows that the share of sustainable revenues in all realized revenues of Tehran municipality during these years has always fluctuated and decreased between 2 and 25%. To improve this, there were no sustainable revenues, and the municipality relied heavily on temporary unsustainable revenues, especially coming from housing and construction. Although the study exposed that despite declining in revenues, a lot of financial resources have been spent on low priority urban projects. And this is the critical point also. In other words, many urban leaders in our region, they are wasting the budget because of some ambitious projects and big projects in cities that the effectiveness of and the productivity of this project is not guaranteed. Regarding the result of this study in reforming and developing the financial resources, the following objectives should be considered. Number one, identifying and applying, introducing innovative tools and high technologies in generating sustainable revenues and consumption management to reduce the cost of the projects. Number two, adopting the new methods of urban development policies and strategies and local governance. And number three, identifying and introducing of investment packages to foreign investors and also in our local and domestic investors in urban maintenance and urban development projects and operation, and also to expand the city infrastructure and facilities. So thank you very much.
That was fantastic. It's really great to hear all of the mobilization that you've been doing on the ground. So often we talk about international actors, but the importance of local budgets. Can you hear me? Yes?
Yes, please.
The importance of local budgets, good local management, really strong local fiscal policy to really partner with both local capital and international capital coming in. This is so critical. And even these local ecosystems, as you've been talking about, to involve community actors, the right partners and so forth. So I think Tehran would be a fantastic case study for us to be looking at for other cities, and look forward to maybe developing something that can be shared with the rest of the world. So really appreciate your perspectives here.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. If I can continue on this theme of the evolution of cities themselves, I'd love to turn to Lori, and I know you're talking about it from a climate perspective, and certainly we've heard this just now from Mr. Musaffari, but if you can share a little bit about the work that you're doing and how cities are progressing along this path towards shifting how they're thinking about capital, both local and international, as well as building their own capacity. So again, we're running a little bit of short on time. If I can ask you to keep your remarks closer to the kind of 3 to 4 minute point. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Alice. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Hi. Basically, the climate investment funds, maybe I'll just give a very brief introduction of who we are. We have been established in 2008. We have mobilized resources for more than 8 billion for investments in low carbon and climate resilient development. And within those more than 10 years of business in climate finance, we have been collaborating with our multilateral development bank partners, 6 of them, the African Development Bank, Asian Development Bank, EBRD, IDB, IFC, and the World Bank. And we see that after the implementation of our different programs and projects within those 10 years, we have formulated a specific program for the cities, and we will be focusing on small and medium-sized cities, because we believe that these small and medium-sized cities holds the greatest potential for sustainable and resilient and inclusive development. And that, but however, with these cities, they face a lot of barriers to climate smart investment. They have issues with credit worthiness, with bankability, and they need to strengthen their capacity to make viable project pipeline. And with the climate investment funds, we have we have a business model we call a programmatic approach, where we don't implement initiatives project by project, but through a programmatic approach where we plan to work with the cities through our MDB partners to look into the different components of implementing an comprehensive investment programs, from doing rapid city diagnostic in the beginning, where cities will assess their current situation and their projected trends and how they are exposed to climate risk. And based on that rapid city diagnostic, they can prepare a climate-informed strategic spatial planning and investment, and prepare a project pipeline for development. And after that, they can actually implement these catalytic investment projects. And the Climate Investment Funds Cities Program will actually support the cities from capacity building, technical assistance, to actual implementation of projects on the ground. And these investment projects can range from different types of investments, from ensuring energy efficiency in buildings, promoting mass rapid transit and bus rapid transit, implementing resilient water supply systems, and also promoting nature-based solutions in infrastructure systems that they would like to work on. And so we are doing this, and the cities is now, our board has already approved the program, and we are now in the fundraising mode in order to implement the program and be able to promote and support cities in implementation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lori. That is a very exciting program, and especially appreciate kind of from diagnostic to moving all the way towards engaging with investors and project close. So this sounds like a very interesting program that we'll be following eagerly to see how this evolves. And again, connecting to all the sources of capital that we've been talking about. I'd like to once again turn to Vinicio, if I may, to close out this great discussion, especially from the perspectives of commercial banks, but also anything we might have missed during the session, and parting remarks as we're thinking about this shift across all of the players in the ecosystem, in fact. So over to you to help us close out the session.
Thank you so much, Alice, and what a great discussion today. I think what is being said multiple times is it is very clear that there's demand for projects, demand for developments, demand for funding cities, and also appetite for commercial banks and other banks, multilateral banks, subnational banks, to invest. So there's two things. Well, I think what we need is good projects. We need to have a way to put together very good projects, and to do that, it takes a few things. It takes good engineering understanding. So it takes standardization of practices, but also it requires, especially in those places where development is needed the most, solid and reliable regulation environments, and also to build institutional capacity. In this case, investing also in skilling or reskilling public servants to be able to handle the increasing sophistication of project needs. So those are some elements that can give more confidence and scale for private capital and multilateral subnational capital to transform into real projects. So I think also it is very important for banks to upfront. First, very important for banks to put impact and the SDGs in the center of their strategies. That means also linking performance and an executive rewards or performance metrics to sustainable goals. That is very important. So I think that is an aspect that is extremely important to raise the right incentives for money to move towards this type of investment. I believe that is also very important to upfront set up strategies and business plans with shareholders that clearly manage expectations on this duality of financial sustainability or profitability and impact. So by putting SD in the center of the strategy, formally pacting or setting the goals with the board, it is easier for capital to move towards the projects. So a few things that are important to do that. It is important to have risk appetite statements that are correctly or reasonably aligned to the goals. We cannot have a speech that aims at make an impact, but a risk appetite statement that deviates from that. And so for the business plans, I mean, it should reflect that balance between capital, profitability, and impact. So, and another thing, I think banks should also move and be more and more open to expand their profitability metrics beyond the traditional ones. So one thing that we're doing here, for instance, is that we have RAROC. So it's not only a risk-adjusted return on capital, but as an impact and risk-adjusted return on capital metric. So I think those are the things that can help to unlock the needs and the funds to raise or to go towards the goals that we have. And the final thing that I want to say on the scaling up, I think there is a huge opportunity for, when we talk about coordination, to also use data, to share data, to collect and share data on different needs and the needs of different cities, and try to find the standardized solutions that can be replicated and standardized across the globe. So one thing that we discuss here is we cannot find a street lighting solution, like LED solution, for every single town or every single city that we work with. It's more than 700. We need to standardize best practices as well. So I will leave my final remarks on that. It is the time of systemic action and and use the best of each institution to unlock this opportunity, this very unique opportunity for us to for cities to become the right place for SDGs to flourish. So that's my final remark. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Wonderful way to close out this panel, and a great transition to our next section, which is that definitely we're hearing that there's huge demand, of course, for financing for cities to grow, especially at the secondary level, to grow sustainably. And at the same time, we're hearing, interestingly, there's a lot of capital. And so what are these mechanisms to, in a really scalable way, address the massive financing gap that exists? And it's exciting to see UN Habitat taking the lead in this section. We will start to share a little bit more about a program that UN Habitat has had over the last couple of years, really launched ahead of the previous World Urban Forum and continuing to grow and bring new partners in, which is a much more of a programmatic or systemic reaction to this challenge. And so, if I may, I'm going to introduce this piece, speaking on behalf of all of the UN Habitat partners, which is the Cities Investment Facility, which most of you have been involved in, where we're really trying to bridge these gaps and take advantage of the capital that exists out there, as well as the deep demand to grow sustainably. Next slide. And so one of the misconceptions I think that does exist in the world, given these massive trends, is that the financing in many ways is there. We are seeing a massive shift towards urbanization. We are seeing the shift that we need to align with sustainability. The gap, whether it's 3 trillion or more, it is massive. And if there isn't a reaction, a solution of doing things differently, we are headed towards an unsustainable growth trajectory, a growth of megacities, a growth of cherry picking of unsustainable projects. And so what's interesting, and this is, you know, in many ways, I think reflected by all of our panelists is, and I really like, Vinicio, how you started with, that there is this limited bankable projects rather than a lack of funds in many cases. And how do we really bring forward, and sorry if we can have the slide deck back, but if we can in some ways really work with cities to do all the things that we heard Tehran was doing, to do some of the things that Lori was mentioning is going to be happening on the financing side. How do we really drive this kind of preparation of cities to take advantage of the diverse sources of capital that are out there, and at the same time adhere to the sustainable principles so that we really do combine both risk-adjusted returns. I love your thoughts around the impact-adjusted returns. But what's interesting is that the global holders of capital in the world, the 50, 60 trillion plus of asset allocators out there, they are very much incorporating ESG as part of their investment mandates. Again, coming back to Carol's word at the very beginning, they are looking for higher yields, and at the same time, they're looking for ESG-aligned investments. And so how do we take advantage of these global shifts? And so Cities Investment Facility is really aiming to leverage a lot of the UN Habitat portfolio, but all of the partners that are out there to catalyze at least, I would hope, hundreds of billions in financing, translating the needs of governments into a pipeline of truly investable projects for investors on a programmatic and systemic basis. Next slide. The three areas and the approach that CIF or CIF is taking here is first on kind of the discovery side, where to your point on data, to your point of understanding what are the projects that are out there, there's an investment portal that has already been launched, run by Think City, where we're going to be really looking at projects coming into a platform. And there's several other platforms out there. We really need to have many players being able to have projects come in, submit the data, and do it at standards. Next is this Upstream Advisory, really building the capacity of municipalities and city governments and project developers combined with a feasibility fund, because certain things really need to be addressed, whether it's assessment of the environmental impacts or the basic business models and revenues of a project. How do you really have all of that data and information such that investors can make a decision? And finally, we need a number of different vehicles to be able to really address grouping and aggregating investment facilities around the world, different types of risk capital, to really then go to different asset classes and different risk profiles of any particular project. And so this is this really interesting response that UN Habitat is leading to be able to address these challenges. And as always, as we've been talking about, all of this is done through collaboration. So I'd love to bring in the partners that are leading these different pieces to explain how this is coming together. So first, turning to Matt and Natalie from Think City, and next slide, please, to talk about the city's investment portal.
Thank you, Alice. The City's Investment Portal is a digital platform that enables investors and city project owners to connect and collaborate on the mobilization of funds for sustainable urbanism. The key value proposition or the opportunity here is that investors will have access to a pipeline, a consolidated pipeline of de-risked, investable, and importantly, SDG aligned city projects. City project owners will have access to a pool of investors. They'll have access to expertise to de-risk their projects and support from the other CIF partners. And importantly, they'll have project endorsement and international exposure. It is what we consider the first entry point into the CIF. We currently have an open call, and an open call as the projects are submitted will be reviewed by an independent and cross multidisciplinary team who will assess those projects to be posted onto the portal. The current call for submissions closes on the 8th of November. And on that, I'd invite my colleague Natalie to do a very quick walkthrough of the portal as it stands. Thank you. Over to you, Natalie.
Thanks, Matt. Hi, everyone. I'll take you on a quick tour of the city's investment facility. The very first starting point would be to visit the city's investmentfacility.org, which will bring you to the landing page of the platform. I then invite you to click on Browse Projects, which will take you to a page where all the sustainable urban projects that the City Investment Facility Selection Committee have reviewed to deem its suitability for the facility. Here you can search for projects. You can also filter projects by sectors, from affordable housing to waste to water and sanitation. You can also filter through SDGs, by locality, as well as the investment types and financing structures. So to just give you a taste of what some of those projects might look like, if you put in, for example, Ankara, and you select a project, it'll take you to the project page where you have access to a wealth of information provided by the city. And that ranges from things like the progress of the project, so you can see how it's moving along from inception to dissemination. You can view things like the SDG goals and how it aligns, to also then the financing. You know, what is it looking for, the type of investment that it might be suited for this sort of project. So I do encourage you to have a look through the projects, a great wealth of information out there. I then also like to draw your attention to the project open call. So as Matt mentioned, the open call is available at the moment until the 8th of November. There is a video, so I do encourage you to also look at the video, which will give you a bit more background into the application process. Here on this page, you can view information in terms of eligibility for submission, criteria, FAQs, and you can also download 3 important documents that can help guide the project submission process. And through that, you may then submit your project at the end of the page. So I do invite you to visit this website at your own leisure, again at citiesinvestmentfacility.org, where you can learn more about the facility, its partners, the portal and browsing those projects, as well as the open call and submitting your project here. And with that, I'd like to hand back to Alice for the next section of the presentation.
Fantastic. And so you have, so as we've been talking about, what are the different pieces to really connect these city projects with investors? And so as Natalie and Matt were talking about having this open call, having cities submit their projects, how do we think about the overall challenge of cities, as Lori was mentioning, go through the full scope, if you will, from what is the opportunity in the city, what is our policy around something, to then developing the concept, to then really preparing the project. As I mentioned briefly, we need to do a feasibility of those projects. Then that's handed over to much more of an advanced kind of design and development of that project. We need to tender out all of the partners, move towards financial close, and then finally to construction and operation. And I think a lot of times, as was mentioned before, cities and municipalities, Vinicio brought this up as well, they don't have this as a muscle that they're used to. How do we really understand all of these pieces that we need to go through? Sometimes I've seen people, I have an idea, they send me a paragraph, they're like, all right, bring us the money, you know, and that's nowhere near what obviously they need to be able to drive financing. And this type of shift really needs to happen over sometimes many months, sometimes a couple of years to get to financial close. And so what we're trying to do is to do this upstream project preparation as part of City's investment facility. This is the advisory and feasibility part of the platform to really overcome these early stage bottlenecks. And this has to work alongside the platforms because we need to do this at scale. We need to get the standards, we need to get the data, but at the same time, many of the cities are starting from such a nascent stage, they need some handholding along the way. And the cost of feasibility is very high. So, and this is something that Sharmark from UN Habitat will speak about a little bit later. How do we also reduce cost across the system? What are these platforms that are coming out, whether it's Source or others? And how do we set up the right fund structures to be able to do this at scale? And so this is the advisory piece of the platform, from handholding the cities, building capacity, and setting up some of these feasibility mechanisms. After that is done, we really need to pass it on to the next stage of development. And with that, under CIF, we have another partner coming in. I'd love to pass it over to John from EMIF to talk about the next stage of this activity.
You mean John, or you mean me, David?
Oh, sorry, John. I thought John was presenting from
the CI
EMIF.
vehicles, yeah.
Oh, right.
Yes,
Sorry,
David,
EMIF. I was confusing with
come...
IMIF. I'm sorry. I was confusing with
no,
acronym.
no worries.
No problem. Over to you, John.
David, I will come back to you in just a little while. But first, John, on the EMIF side, if I may.
Thank you, Alison, and great to see you. And it's a pleasure to hear from some of my colleagues on this call and to provide EMIF's overview as a city's investment partner and manager of one of the program's city's investment vehicles. At a high level, CI vehicles take over from the CIAP's earlier upstream project preparation work that Alice touched upon. And we're mandated to ensure that the remaining works to be performed are done to international standards sufficient to attract global sources of private capital and debt. CI vehicles work with project proponents to provide the remaining development funding and the development oversight. On the preparation side of things, CIVs will help with identifying the appropriate technical advisors, legal representation, environmental and social and financial advisors, and any other typical work stream. Further, if a lead debt arranger has not yet been identified, we'll endeavor to secure a lender by leveraging our multilateral and development bank network. And lastly, to the extent that additional viability grant funding required to align the business case risk reward with what is anticipated from a required financial return perspective, we will assist in launching that process to secure it. We work with project proponents to identify the remaining works to be performed that I've already highlighted, and then we provide an estimated budget for that remaining work. Once the project reaches a preparation level suitable to attract the construction capital, we continue to work with proponents through the tender process. Projects that are tendered may possess different DPP profiles and can be represented by concessions such as user pay, government pay through long-term offtakes, or supported through the existing tax base. We're also able to support the build finance transfer model, where traditional financial close doesn't really happen. However, we are funded on a blended finance basis, which means we are seeking to earn a return on our time and development investment. So to achieve this, we seek to earn a multiple on our investment to be paid at financial close by the project equity and debt funders as part of the total project cost. Thus, on a build finance transfer basis, the tender would need to support a predetermined fee to remunerate the development work. Long term, ultimately the goal of the CIVs is to rely less on grant, concessionary, and blended finance capital and to attract increasing amounts of private capital sources. Entering at the mid-stage of development with pre-existing demonstrable government engagement coupled with needed risk mitigation and intervention, already socialized and identified through prior capacity building work with the CIAPs. We think this reduced risk manifests itself through robust fund returns and think that this helps foster attracting greater quantities of sideline private capital, both into the CI vehicles and ultimately catalyze construction capital. I think what we're doing really mirrors the general concept, if you're familiar with it, IFC's Scaling Solar Initiative, which is to develop a portfolio of turnkey investable construction projects within a country that are ready to tender to international capital. Of course, the CIVs perform much of the same preparation work, but have a broader mandate for the types of assets that we work with, and certainly the lens of subnational rather than national impact. Kind of in summary, like it's sort of a win-win-win situation, if you will. The UN, through this program, UN Habitat helps to catalyze in achieving the SDG commitments. The cities themselves gain the funding and expertise needed to realize their critical infrastructure needs, and then replicate the preparation works that have done in concert with the CIVs, and perhaps rely less on this type of program in the future. As well as the CIVs themselves, we're certainly catalyzing investment into smaller and mid-market assets in subnational entities in places and parts of the world that may not have that experience, and really leverage that gap in the market in order to generate a profitable return for our fund investors. That's it for me. Thanks very much, Alice.
Thanks, John. That's fantastic. As you can see, we're really putting in place, we're institutionalizing to overcome a lot of the bottlenecks that exist. So it's getting down to the brass tacks of what exactly needs to happen to move these projects to investability, and then even building sustainability models to make it happen. And so it will take a number of different vehicles to move this forward. And so I'd love to invite now Blend Lab to share the vehicle structure that they're going to be pushing forward. So over to you guys.
Yeah, thank you, Alice. I'm Sergio Marcondes here. I'm one of Blend Lab's founders. And well, good afternoon, good morning from Brazil. Blend Lab is a Brazilian institution dedicated to the development of sustainable financing solutions, bridging the gap between sustainable urbanization projects and private investors. So it's a great honor for us to join the city's investment facility as one of the implementing partners in the investment vehicles end. And our approach is based on this assumption that the convergence of investments in a given territory under the same development thesis can increase value generation, reduce risks, and reduce costs. So this was the conceptual starting point that led us to design this structure, which is an investment facility in which different investment vehicles, such as nonprofit funds or investment funds, bonds, and so forth, are organized in a way that balances risks, reduces transaction costs, and operates with assertiveness and with legal certainty for the investors. As John was mentioning early on the session, this is what we call a blended finance approach. As an example of what we're doing here, the first project we are supporting in Brazil is an affordable housing project in 2 cities here in Brazil. It is financed by a bond consisting of 2 types of quotas. senior quota representing 75% of the total amount of capital coming from the capital markets on business as usual conditions, and a subordinated quota of 25% of catalytic capital coming from development banks and philanthropists. This specific subordinated quota, it works like the risking machine within the bond. And I'm taking this term from Mr. Leslie Mazdov from MDB. I love the term, the risking machine. So this quota has a greater risk tolerance and a longer investment return period. And this is exactly what makes it possible to attract the rest of the capital under market conditions, usual market conditions. So I was very happy to hear Mr. Leslie Mazdov from MDB mentioning the very same kind of concept in his speech early, because this is exactly what we're trying to do. So this example of housing bond represents a very simple version, actually, of our approach. This kind of financial architectures can still gain many layers of complexity in order to mobilize even larger amounts of capital. But it's always based on the same premise that development resources can create viability conditions for attracting capital on a large scale, which is very critical and absolutely indispensable for facing the challenges of sustainable urbanization over the next years. So we're talking about blended finance in one side, this geographical approach and convergence of investments in a given territory and a spatial cut to mobilize large-scale capital. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. And as you can see, we really do need to have these different types of vehicles mobilizing different capital structure, different sources of capital, different kinds of capital structures. Another one, and this is the final one we'll talk about today, is from Rial. Just checking if our colleagues are still on the line. If not, I will do a quick summary, which is that you're seeing kind of a similar type of approach where this is in the kind of particular sector of climate smart affordable homes, where they're really looking to build and demonstrate these kinds of commercial and viable affordable homes. So they're really an expert in housing, and they would come in as a sectoral vehicle to this view. So if you have different kinds of, let's say, capital that has particular IRRs that they need to get at, or geographic investors, or different kinds of sectors that we're seeing here. And Rial would be coming in with a vehicle that is looking specifically at the housing market, really able to lend their expertise to this particular sector as we're looking at investment opportunities around the world. So those are the summary of some of the vehicles under the city's investment facility. And would just like to close out this session with a last slide to say that there is, as was mentioned, an open call underway. So if you are coming in from different cities around the world, there is a chance to upload your projects to the city's investment facility. We will be reviewing shortlisted projects. They will be receiving support, advisory, connection to some of these facilities for investment. And some of these projects will be featured in WIF 11 in Poland. We did that in WIF 10 in Abu Dhabi, and we're hoping to replicate that at the next WIF. We also want to move forward with a dialogue on the unique challenges of some of the secondary cities investment. What does it look like in terms of capacity building, standardization, data, et cetera, all of the things that have been mentioned so far. And please do reach out to this, this platform essentially under UN Habitat for partnership project ideas beyond the open call. This is something that is a mandate for UN Habitat to drive financing for urban, sustainable urban investment. So that wraps up our session on SIF, and would love to turn to the last session of this packed session, as you're seeing, which is looking at what are the different platforms and structures that are being set up around the world, where we really want to use technology. We want to think about innovative structures to drive to some of the things that have been talked about: data, improved capacity, higher quality, aligned policies, aligned standards, especially as we're trying to collaborate across this whole ecosystem. How do we start to take a look at the same kinds of data and information and drive the quality of that information to be higher, and to do that much faster than a one-by-one type of project engagement, which is one of the questions that Daifa just asked in the chat as well. And so with that, and I know that one of our panelists has a time commitment, so we're going to start off actually with Christoph from Source to present a little bit more about what you're doing in terms of the technology platform and how you're able to really see this future vision of unlocking capital across the sector. So over to you, sir.
Thank you, Alice, and thank you, UN Habitat, SDG Cities, for organizing this event, especially on a Saturday. So it's, but anyway, it's a pleasure to be here and taking the time, even on a Saturday, because there are important issues, especially with COP26 coming next week, where I will be attending. So if there are others from here that will be attending, we could meet face to face. So first of all, why Source? Source has been created for two reasons, and it will answer the points that have been mentioned today. First is to have a pipeline of well-prepared projects, and that I will focus on that in a while. And the second is to support government on their digitalization agenda. So there are many different governments that have started it, that have plans to do it, that are really advanced, but we are basically going inside the governments to help them on their digitalization path, whether it's national or subnational government. So why those two objectives? And by the way, Source, the governance of Source is composed of the multilateral development banks. So we have 5 MDBs on it, from the African Development Bank, Asian Development Bank, EBRD, EIB, Inter-American Development Bank, and World Bank Group. So they are basically the ones that are the boss of the platform. They are disseminating the platform for free to their member countries so they can use it to better prepare their project. Why those two objectives, well-prepared project and digitalization, is because project preparation is a major issue globally, whether it's the developing, emerging, or even developed countries. There are lack of capacity at the subnational level, even in developed countries. And there is a need to have better projects that are presented to the private sector. Whether it's a PPP or a traditional procurement, an EPC will need the right data in order to do a good bidding. So the challenges of project preparation are global. They can be expensive. It takes time, it takes resources, it takes expertise. But of course, if you look at projects that are prepared by New Development Bank or BDMG, those projects, they're going to be investable, they're going to be bankable. So there is no issue in terms of the MDBs doing their job of, or large DFIs to be the job of making sure those projects are well prepared. However, large DFIs and MDBs and bilateral donors, they cannot cover all the project preparation needs that governments have around the world. This is not feasible because some countries, they're going to have thousands of projects in their pipelines. So what we have been doing with the platform is to identify what would be the different functionalities that a project management tool would need for having a systemic change, a systematic collection of data towards standardization. And this is what Vinicio was mentioning before, systemic data collection and standardization. In order to do that, we have had actually successful pilots with BDMG recently on Source that will be presented at COP26. And what we have realized is that you need 4 things. So first, you need to make sure that there is a good planning, so a good visual of pipeline that is being developed inside the country. So how can you make sure that you have a good visual of, with different KPIs? And what you have been doing with SIF is excellent because KPIs on SDGs are essential. Second, you need to have a good communication flow between the different ministries, agencies, PPP units, because Ministry of Transport finance, budget, planning, they do not communicate well inside governments, whether it's national or subnational, the information doesn't flow seamlessly. So first, planning; second, good communication; third, very important, ownership. There are many different platforms and tools, but the governments, they need to see their own specificities, their own needs, but also the same language that they have to work with. So customization of the platform is also very important in order to meet those specific needs. And fourth is to have a common language between the public sector and the private sector. And we go back to the standardization aspect. And on the platform, what we have done is to create with the private sector. So we have had hundreds of companies, the big names, that have provided 7,000 comments in order to have templates, subsectoral templates to be created so that the projects are prepared based on what they need to look for. It doesn't mean the projects will be bankable and investable, because that will be the role of the government, consultants, third-party advisor, MDBs, donors, international organizations. However, the private sector, we say there is no financing issues for projects, but the problem is that they have a limited pool of capital that each investor will have. So they are going and they are cherry picking their project. So they want to make sure that the project they are looking at will have the right information so they can make a due diligence and taking a decision. So it doesn't mean that what is coming out of source is bankable or investable. What it means, it is well prepared so that as an investor or as an EPC, I'm going to find the information that I need when the projects are published by the government. So those are the different functionalities that we had to develop in the past few years with the MDBs in order to have the platform to be used systematically. Now, in terms of numbers, we are doing this integration in 11 countries simultaneously. We have 30 countries that have asked to use the platform systematically. And we are now raising funds from different donors in order to meet that demand. So we have more than 4,000 users. There are close to 600 projects. A lot of them are being published. Some of them are being published for COP26 with different labels that have been inputted into the platform. But the point is, if you look at well-prepared project and digitalization, it had to be transformed into a user-friendly tool that is customizable with a standardized set of questions, but also to make sure that they were going to use it, again, systematically. And that had to be a very long work in order to address that need inside the governments and holding their hands for 9 to 12 months so they can use the platform systematically. And now we are getting success stories in terms of projects being prepared, projects being published and financed. And using the platform is very easy for a city or for a national government or subnational government. Is basically to send an email to the team, and then we provide a platform, an online training. And we provide a platform for free as a public good, because this is the mandate that we have from the development banks. And finally, we are going to develop further the platform towards cities, because we need to develop more and more functionalities that will be beneficial to the cities based on the feedback from the users. And we are signed a partnership with UN Habitat with SDG cities in order to further develop that work. And we look forward to continue the work with the city investment facility. Thank you.
Fantastic. Really looking forward to getting a run through of Source at some point soon. I'm sure everybody would benefit from that and see the power of what you've developed, and also as you start rolling it out, looking forward to more and more deal flow coming out of what you've created. So fantastic. Would love to now turn it over to David Jackson, if I can, the other IMIF, to share a lot of the innovative work that you're doing. And again, with an eye towards scale. How do we really unlock? I mean, we've got, again, trillions of dollars in a capital gap. And I know, David, you've been working on this for quite a while. So I want to turn it over to you to share some of the work that you've been undertaking.
Thank you so much indeed, Alice. So I'll be brief. I know that time is short. So I think first it's easy to be brief because the comments that Leslie made at the very beginning really underline a lot of what I was going to say in my introduction. So please kind of remember those comments that Leslie made about the global financial ecosystem, how it's not working for cities and local governments, the role of the MDBs, etc. So taking that into account and understanding the point that have also been made by the speaker from other speakers, in fact, about the availability of capital potentially, then to me, when people say, oh, there's a lot of money, there's just not enough bankable projects, let's just get the bankable projects so the problem is solved. It's not quite as easy as that. It's really the form of the financing, the price of the capital has to be in a way which is accessible and amenable for cities and local governments. So there's regulatory and legal issues there, of course, because it's supranational finance. And there are, as Leslie pointed out, most development finance is sovereign based, and sub-sovereign is a different question altogether. And there's an issue of the contingent liability of the sovereign if the sub-sovereign gets involved. So there's a regulatory issue there and even a financial architecture issue. But beyond that, how to get to scale, it really needs a blend which is very city specific. And we're working very closely with CIFA. We're also one of the partners of UN Habitat's work in this space. And there's, I've listed really 7 different elements to this blend that need to be combined in order for this to go to scale. So, I mean, in no particular order, there needs to be a set of guarantee facilities that are sub-sovereign friendly. We are working very closely with a couple of partners on that are prepared to offer guarantees to sub-national entities, either cities themselves or often special purpose vehicles created by the city to carry the projects, because we're talking about city projects, but the cities themselves don't financially carry that project. Quite often it's these vehicles that are created that actually carry that project, these specific entities. So guarantees are very important. Secondly, there needs to be the correct blend of equity and debt. We've created something called, you mentioned to this, the International Municipal Investment Fund. This is managed by Meridian, one of the biggest asset managers on infrastructure in the world. So they manage this fund, which is essentially an equity fund. So the way they manage their risk and the way they deal with the sub-sovereign issue is they come in and buy a stake, and they will hold that stake for many, many years. And that's how they manage the exchange rate risk and the other risks. Now, I mentioned exchange rate risk. So another problem with international capital, of course, is managing this exchange rate if it goes into cities with different currencies. So there needs to be an element of local currency lending and even of capital markets, subnational bonds that can be floated on the domestic stock exchanges and therefore enable pension funds of those countries to reinvest savings into securities that are related to these kind of investments. We're working with some governments on that. In fact, the government of Tanzania has agreed to support us and in creating a municipal bond market in that country. And I know those markets need to be developed and deepened because that's a further element to add to the blend. There also, mention was made of the way in which multilateral development banks, their risk ratio and the way they might maybe clog up their balance sheets with exposures that could be better handled by commercial banks. This was a point that Leslie also made. We are working with a First Rand Bank on something called Ellipsis, which will take from the balance sheets of existing DFIs and commercial banks, green projects, but which are maturing, and try to float those off in a securitized platform on the London and Johannesburg stock exchanges, therefore freeing up that capital for more green finance in the cities. Finally, of course, it's not only public. We're talking about blended finance, it's not only private. We're talking about blended finance, and there is a public element to the blend, of course. So there's a mechanism called the Local Climate Adaptive Living Facility that we've developed, and 27 countries have now signed up to this. And this is a way to bring green climate fund and global climate finance, public finance, down to the cities so that cities can access directly public finance for climate infrastructure. And this can often provide some of the public investments in roads, like access roads, the planning, the elements of a package which are publicly financed to enable that package to take place. Finance to overcome that through public finance. Now we're talking still about the public element. So one key problem I think that cities face, and this is what mayors are constantly saying to us, is project by project doesn't do it. We've got plenty of holiday inns, plenty of shopping malls. It needs to be kind of master plan financing that actually covers the whole city and deals with the other parts, not just the shopping mall hotel side of things. So there's a couple of initiatives which are really, well, many initiatives, but there's two that we're working on that are really gaining steam in this area. One is the Blue Piece initiative, which is about really water master plan financing, where you look at a river basin and a group of cities, and then you're able to pool investments, pool exposures, reduce the risk, and therefore have financing through blended finance for things like water pipes. I mean, one of the big issues, of course, is it's easy to get finance for bottled water. Water pipes, a little bit different. So by using the pooled and the master plan financing, you can do that. And finally, of course, there is own source revenue, because cities themselves need to manage their budgets better, raise funds better, and of course the asset management. They need to manage their assets better. So in fact, 70% of infrastructure cost over the life of the infrastructure is actually asset management, not the construction itself. So we're working very closely with UN Habitat and UNDESA on UN Habitat on own source revenue and UNDESA on asset management. There's now actually a global network of asset managers in cities, so that they can improve their asset management and even make their assets turn into sources of revenue, which can then build the own source revenue. And so I think all of these blends together. I mean, no one city and no one country has got this all right. But looking at these different elements, you can start to create financial kind of engineering that works for the cities. And this is what we're with United Cities and Local Governments. We have what we call the Malaga Coalition for a global financial ecosystem that works for cities and local governments. So that you put the city as the client, you look at the world from their perspective. And these are some of the issues that come up. And I think what has been very interesting about this meeting, is we've heard from the MDB perspective, we've heard from the financiers perspective. If you turn around, look at from the city financial officers perspective, how do they see it? And then it's how making those two things match together. And so we're very proud and privileged to be working very closely with Cities Investment Facility as a partner to that, to be able to kind of make this match, because at the end of the day, it's the form of the financing that dictates the form of the city. What a city looks like is partly a function of how it's been financed. And that's where we hope we can kind of bring city-friendly financing, so you don't get these islands of a shopping mall there, a hotel there, and then everything not very nice in between. So I'll conclude there, and we hope that this partnership with UN Habitat as part of the CIF can really bring this experience to the pipeline that is coming through for the CIF.
Fantastic, David. And I really like the specificity of how you were describing some of the different pieces, as well as the integrated project lens that we need to take rather than the cherry picking that we keep seeing, and a lot of the aggregation facilities to drive towards scale, as well as reduced costs alongside the capacity building of local governments. So thank you so much for those great comments. Our last speaker will also be from UN Habitat. I want to turn over to Sharmark to share the feasibility fund approach that UN Habitat is taking to, again, drive towards scale, towards programs to be able to unlock more capital and really bring the appropriate financing to city governments around the world. Over to you, Sharma.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you, colleagues. This has been such an enriching discussion. I think very appropriate that I'm going last here in terms of kind of tying it back to what you mentioned in your opening remarks to this session, Alice, and what colleagues have highlighted here. I'd just like to start off with really, quoting the president of the New Development Bank yesterday, who highlighted the importance of kind of driving cities to make their economic potential. And one of the things that he highlighted was the need for project preparation. We saw this earlier when CIP was being presented as one of the key components, and where we're finding some of the gaps. And one of the major gaps is kind of being able to channel available private capital resources and sustainable development projects in developing and emerging communities. But we've also heard that some of the developed countries are also having a challenge in this in terms of kind of project preparation. So we've also heard today that really, in our experience, has been really, there's no shortage of available project pipelines, but having them presented in a financially structured way that can attract private capital is also another gap that we've identified. This often is kind of due to lack of knowledge and capacity in upstream project preparation. So one of the things that UN Habitat, in working with many partners, including GDI, has been looking at the potential of a pre-feasibility fund. What is this pre-feasibility fund doing, and what does it hope to accomplish? We know that many cities in developing countries tend not to have sufficient budgets for pre-feasibilities. Most people want to come in towards the end when really there's a strong proof of concept, but funding that pre-feasibility and ensuring, as we've heard, really the de-risking, ensuring that there's capacity building and all of the available kind of de-risking is in terms of kind of environmental social safety guards, looking at policy and regulation, looking at laws, is what really this pre-feasibility that we're proposing hopes to do is provide that technical assistance, that skills transfer very much at the local level, and ensuring that there's impact in each of the different projects that become really a proof of concept and are also aligned with the SDGs, so that investors who are engaged can really engage in a more meaningful way and ensure that these projects come to the marketplace. So the second slide I have here is really kind of breaking down how the proposed feasibility fund is kind of looking at what are the different elements. So we want to ensure that there's this blended finance. We've realized and recognized over the last year of working with foundations. Foundations are playing a critical role in ensuring that there is some engagement in offering these grants. They're also, interested in the long term. We look at foundations investing kind of long-term sustainability and having that blended finance with private sector foundations, philanthropies, as well as private capital, and looking at kind of public funds, whether they're municipal repayment loans, looking at fees, kind of subscription-based fees, and tying in really critical components that ensure really checks and balances are met. We've heard of SOURCE, and I look really forward to working with Christopher on ensuring that we use that platform to really ensure the quality of projects being proposed. We have the City Investment Advisory Panel and the great work that Think City is doing in the portal that we quickly saw. I look forward as well to ensure that the projects are also uploaded there. So the next component is really identifying a secretariat for the feasibility fund to ensure that there's pipelines are managed, that there's strong relationships built, and ensure that there's service agreements with service providers, different service providers offering different elements of the pre-feasibility once it's finalized. Then we've created what we're calling kind of the fund investment criteria to ensure that projects are not just looking at capital cities, but there's a focus on secondary and tertiary cities, that we're really looking at kind of urban infrastructure kind of subsets, water and sanitation, and to ensure that the projects are also community-driven and SDG aligned. So again, we've heard a lot about kind of the customization today and regulation and offering that data. And I think the pre-feasibility is going to create a rich source of data so that investors have a well-informed approach and are making sound decisions based on feasibilities with sound data and information. Now, how one of the grant structure kind of interest-free loans that we're looking at, they can be as little as $5,000 to as much as about $150,000 in terms of kind of project support for project.
Préstamos con concesionales para
sorry, I think someone has their mic on.
Yes.
Okay.
Someone needs to.
Los
Sorry.
proyectos.
No worries.
Los proyectos que han aprobado el estudio de viabilidad.
I believe that is the Spanish translator that is with the mic open. Yes, there we go.
No worries. Thank you, Vicencio, for that. So what I would like to move on to is really what we've heard from in terms of partners that we've worked on in terms of kind of sustainable projects. One of the key areas and one of the foundations that we've been working with through the Foundation and Philanthropy platform is Real. And it's really interesting kind of looking at customizable approaches to looking at the feasibility fund, where they've come back to us and said, look, we're looking to co-invest and invest our own resources to ensure that the feasibility fund can attract other potential investors. So we're open to kind of geographical feasibility fund calls. We're open to kind of local feasibility fund or thematic feasibility fund calls. And I think the infrastructure that we've created in terms of the city investment facility, the different vehicles, the city advisory platform, looks at a whole suite of services where the feasibility fund is one of the key core components of that. Now, we're also looking at kind of different service providers and ensuring again that the legal kind of regulatory understanding the very local context, having very specialized kind of engineering services for technical studies, again, ensuring that there's environmental social safety guards, and the community sustainability, I think, is the most critical and important thing here. And what we've looked at in terms of kind of project parameters is contracts with service providers via grants, loans, and fund contracts for service providers on behalf of promoters. So this is what the proposed feasibility fund is looking at, and we're certainly excited and happy to be working with all the different partners and happy to be on this platform where, again, I think the previous speaker highlighted the importance of the whole ecosystem where investors, partners from the multilateral development banks are also on this call. So thank you, colleagues, for the opportunity, and I'll end right there.
Thanks so much, Sharmark. Really appreciate it. I know we're over on time, and so I just wanted to say, first of all, a huge thank you to all of our panelists and speakers. It's been an incredibly rich discussion. It's actually fundamentally different to most of these discussions that have happened in the past, which have stayed at a quite general level. I've been incredibly excited to hear the specifics from every speaker on how this is going to move forward. We have our work cut out for us. I think overall, it's an optimistic conclusion that I'll have, which is that there is a lot of interest, a lot of attraction of different actors working in the ecosystem. I can almost see this as a movement moving forward. At the same time, there's a real systemic approach to this with different capital providers, different kinds of fund structuring experts, product experts coming in to offer their services. There's a real interest in working together in a much more collaborative way, really aligning on data platforms, the way that we're evaluating risk. We're starting to see structures come up around how financing, the very nature of how we're creating different structures, is shifting across the entire ecosystem, how mandates are changing of commercial banks, of the foundations and high net worth individuals, of the multilateral development banks are evolving and how capital is provided. So this is a really exciting, if you will, future that we're coming into. But exactly as we've heard from David and so many others, the devil's in the details. Exactly how will we make this happen? And I'm very heartened by the fact that I think we have the right people in the room. We have the right people on this call, and we have the right people working with UN Habitat on this effort. So once again, thank you for your time, for your Saturday, and for all the efforts that you'll have going forward to make this vision to make this capital gap and to drive towards a sustainable urban agenda a reality. So all the best to everyone. Thank you again for your time and looking forward to future conversations. All the best.